Good evening. This is Dan Weary from Michael Baker International. We're the consultants assisting the city with the preparation of the housing element update. We're just going to give it another minute, let a few more people come into the meeting room. We see we've got a growing number of attendees. And then in just a minute, Michael Wren from the city planning department will just give a brief welcome. So please just give us a few more seconds and we'll get started. Okay. Well, it looks like our attendees have kind of stabled out. Welcome. Thank you for sharing your dinner time with us. Again, I'm Dan Weary from Michael Baker International. We're the planning consultants assisting the city of Modesto with the preparation of their housing element update. And we've just got a brief logistical announcement, and then we'll get into the formal introductions in just a minute. So right now, I'd like to hand it off to Giovanna, who's our interpreter tonight, providing live interpretation in Spanish.
Buenas noches. Esta reunión contará con interpretación simultánea bidireccional en inglés y en español. Si usted es bilingüe, no tiene que presionar nada. Si usted no es bilingüe, tendrá que elegir su idioma para escuchar la interpretación. Si está usando una computadora, verá un icono en la parte inferior de su pantalla a la derecha en forma de globo que dice interpretación. Si hace clic ahí, seleccione español. Si está usando un iPad o un teléfono, localice el menú de 3 puntos que aparece arriba a la derecha, haga clic en interpretación de idiomas y elija español. Cuando sea su turno de hablar, por favor recuerde hablar en voz fuerte y clara y a un paso moderado, ya que el intérprete estará interpretando simultáneamente al otro idioma. Thank you. I may be assigned now.
Right. Thank you, Giovanna. And then I've just got a couple of slides here. Throughout this meeting, in your Zoom panel, for all of our audience members, please use the Q&A button in your Zoom toolbar. Usually it's at the bottom. And using that Q&A button, you can type in any comments or questions that you have. We're going to keep track of those throughout this presentation. And at the end of the presentation, we're going to answer all or as many of the comments and questions that you have as possible. And usually we have plenty of time to get through all of them. Depending on how many we get, we may take a couple of breaks throughout the presentation and answer some along the way. So again, you can use that Q&A button, and that will give you the opportunity to type those in. So we will keep track of those. I can see we've got one already. The question is, can we show who's in this call? I can tell you who's here, and we're going to make some introductions from the consultant and the city side. And then we've got about 15 attendees, and I'm not going to call everybody out by name because there's too many. So again, you can use that Q&A button. Please use that throughout. Do not use the chat. We're not going to monitor the chat button. I don't think it's even empowered. So we're going to try to keep everybody in the Q&A area. And then with that, I'll hand it back to Michael Wren from the city of Modesto to make a brief welcome.
Good evening, everyone. I am Michael Wren, Principal Planner for the City of Modesto, and I welcome you here to our second webinar on the housing element presentation. We're very excited to have so much interest and so many people here to be part of this webinar, and we're very thankful to get your questions, comments, and opinions. We hope you are able to continue to stay engaged and continue to reach out to us with your, as I said, questions and opinions, and filling out the survey if at all possible. I'm joined here by Jessica Hill, my Director of Community and Economic Development, and members from the Michael Baker team who are consultants assisting us with implementing and creating this housing element. And I will hand things off to Dan to move forward with the presentation this evening. I'll be around for questions or other issues as I can be available, but otherwise take it away, Dan.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And again, I just want to remind that I'm not here alone. I'm here with my colleagues, Hannah Kreitman, who will be presenting some of the slides and be part of the Q&A. And Shannon Liska is also part of our presentation, and she's assisting with the Zoom call and will also be available for Q&A. And some of these we'll try to answer if we can throughout the process. And again, we've got time at the end. With that, I just want to note that this presentation is being recorded and it will be posted onto the project website on the city's website, so that at any time you want to go back and re-listen to this, or if you want to recommend it to friends, family, or colleagues, we encourage you to do that. You can watch at your own speed and your own convenience. So if you or somebody else is not able to attend and complete tonight, then again, you can please watch at your leisure later. And we'll have some links and things in here so that you can also find the information that's available on the project website. As Michael mentioned, there is an online survey that's been out for months. We encourage you to take that survey. It's really helpful to us. We want all the input we can get. And the beauty of tonight, when you do submit your comments in writing, those are also being recorded. And that helps us, again, incorporate those into any revisions of the draft housing element. And as we go forward. So excuse me. So real quick, just want to provide kind of an introduction here. City of Modesto has begun the process of amending its general plan. And actually, we've got two projects. We've got the general plan update, and then we've got this specific housing element update, and that's what we're talking about tonight. The housing element is one chapter of the city's general plan. It's important to note there's 9 required elements of every city general plan. They can be combined in different configurations, but these are required elements that the state has told every city and county that they have to prepare. The housing element is unique. It has its own schedule in accordance with state law. It must be updated every 8 years, and that's what we're doing now. We're starting this update for the next 8-year period. And it also, unlike all the other elements that you see on this page, it must be approved by the state. And in this case, it's the State Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD. And you'll hear me refer to HCD throughout this presentation. So overall, what's the purpose? This plan assesses the city's housing needs, any constraints, its resources, and then after that evaluation, sets goals, objectives, and then specific policies and programs or actions to make sure that we do the best we can in meeting these housing needs over this next 8-year period. That will include zoning and identification of sites to meet the needs of all housing or all household incomes and all types of housing. So part of the analysis is to evaluate all the different needs from all different types of segments of the population. And we need to demonstrate that we've got adequate zoning and opportunity to meet those housing needs. Then, as part of identifying sites, we will also identify specific programs to promote fair housing, and again, programs and actions to implement this housing plan over the next 8 years. With that, we wanted to give you just a little bit of an introduction to the city, just some facts and figures so everybody has kind of a base knowledge. So the population of Modesto is about 215,000 people. Roughly 29% are minors or under the age of 19, and roughly 15% are 65 and older. We do note that we look at the census data, and a lot of this is in the draft plan, which is currently on the city's website and available for public review. One of the things that we do is we compare the growth of the city's population in different age groups and all sorts of different statistics. So curiously or interestingly, some of the largest increases in Modesto were in the older end of the population, between 60 and 75 years of age. There's some significant growth there percentage-wise. The largest declines were in the 15 to 19-year-old age group. And generally, they're they're moving into the next age group as they age over the last 10 years. There's also a decline in the 45 to 54-year age group. So again, in those 10 years, we're seeing them shift into that more senior population between 60 and 75. What does that mean? It's just an example where we look at these stats and trends and try to project our needs. So for example, the growing age group of 60 to 74-year-olds, and again, over the next 8 years, suggests that we might need more housing for seniors. That might include age-restricted developments or smaller units for empty nesters, or housing with increased support services and proximity to healthcare. We also saw that that younger group that declined, 15 and 19-year-olds, are now entering their adult years, and that growing 25 to 34-year age group could represent a need for first-time home ownership opportunities. That might be small homes that are affordable, and even some larger homes for young families that have kids and need more space. So that's just an example of how we're using some of this information. And then also on this slide, we show population by race and ethnicity. And significantly here, we note that Modesto has a large Hispanic or Latino population, roughly equivalent with the non-Hispanic or white population, and then a fairly representative distribution amongst the other race and ethnicities, pretty typical of the rest of the county. So with that, we got a few more stats. So we had a population about 215,000. That 250,000 is lives within 71,000 homes. If you do the math, that averages out to about 3.1 persons per household on average. Obviously, some are less, some are more. The median household income is about $74,000. The median affordable purchase price for a family of four and $74,000 would be about $250,000, a little more than 3.5 times the gross household income is kind of a comfortable range, and according to various stats and guidelines. What's notable here is that the median home price is actually closer to $500,000, or nearly double what a typical household should be able to afford comfortably. So that's the gap, and that's part of our need, is how do we address that gap between what's affordable based on income, household incomes and good incomes, and what the current market price is. So real quick, now we've got our audience here and we're up to 19. We wanted to ask a few questions of just who's in the audience, just get to know you a little bit better. So we've got 5 quick questions. A poll should pop up on your screen, it's there, and just quickly answer. So right now, are you listening in English or Spanish? We just like to know who's in each room. And once we get your answers, we'll post those live. So please do that. And once we pop those up, we'll talk about any answers. Typically, it's mostly listeners in English. I don't know if we've got full answers yet, but this is your first opportunity to participate. We've got 4 more questions after this, and then we'll have a couple of questions toward the end of the presentation. So, do we have answers yet? There we go. Okay, great. So 15 of the 17 that answered, 88%, are listening in English, and we do have 2 listening in Spanish. That's great. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you very much. So we got a couple other questions that we just want to get to know a little bit about you, so we understand some of the discussions and that we're going to have later. So the next question is, how long have you lived or worked in the city? So obviously you're here because you have an interest in the housing element in the city of Modesto. We assume you live or work or have some other interest. So 5 years, 5 to 10 years, more than 10 years, or maybe you don't live or work in Modesto and you're interested for some other reason. Please indicate. Great. So we'll give you a few seconds here, answer a few more. Looks like we got another attendee. That's great. It's growing. We're up to 20 officially now. And this is great. Just in time to take a quick quiz of who's in the room. Okay, hopefully we can get our answers here. These are just simple questions. You don't need to think too hard about them, but there we go. So 18% less than 5 years, 12% between 5 and 10 years, and 65% more than 10 years, and 6% don't live or work in Modesto. And I will say that that's pretty typical. Usually the people that attend workshops like this are folks that have a long-term interest in the city or the municipality, and tend to participate more. So we see that higher percentage in the 10+ year segment. So that's great. Thank you very much. We'll go to our next couple of questions here. So again, real quick question, please select those that apply to you. It could be more than one. Are you a homeowner, a renter, a landlord, or other? And if it's other, you can also use the Q&A button and tell us a little bit about what other means for you. And again, good practice. This is helpful for us to understand you, and hopefully will help you engage when we ask a few more pointed questions toward the end of the presentation. I will say we have about 45 slides in total. It'll take about 45 minutes, maybe 55 minutes, depending on the breaks we take, how long it takes to get through some of these questions. And then we'll have up to a full hour to answer any questions or comments that you have later. Okay, let's see, do we have any answers? Let's see our answers, here they come. So 47% homeowners, 24% renter, 6% landlords, that's good. Often we don't get a lot of landlord attendees, and 29% others. So I don't know if anybody answered the Q&A about where they are or what they are, if they're not an owner or a renter or a landlord. Maybe you just are interested in general, you're interested in housing elements and housing equity. That's great, welcome. Appreciate it very much. Okay, so I think we've got one more question. What kind of housing do you live in? And again, please answer even if you're not living in Modesto. But this is kind of the range of housing types: single family, maybe an accessory dwelling unit on a single family property. You might live in a duplex, triplex, or quadplex. Those are small multifamily units. Maybe in a condominium or an apartment building, perhaps a mobile home, or in senior housing or assisted group housing, or something else. Again, you can use the Q&A box and provide some more information. We have one more question after this one, so please answer this one, and then we'll move back into the rest of the presentation. Give you a few more seconds. And do appreciate the participation. And we keep getting more attendees. That's great. Welcome new attendees. You're up to 21. Okay, let's see what kind of answers we got. Again, this isn't a statistical poll, but it's just helpful in us understanding a little bit more about you. So 86% are living in single family housing. I would say it's pretty typical. No accessory dwelling units, only, let's see, 2 in apartment buildings. And so just about everybody answered is either in an apartment building, but mostly are in single family homes. And that tends to go with the number of people that have lived in a community for 10 years or longer. Often we find higher percentages that are in single family homes. Okay, great. Last question. And this is just, where do you live or work in the city of Modesto? What are you most associated with? What area are you most associated with in the city? And we've got these 6 areas kind of blocked out. And I'm not sure why the number order is kind of as it is. I guess it's jogging around a little bit. But again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. Please just pick one. And if you're unsure, you can just hit unsure as well. It's a satisfactory answer. So give that a few seconds. There was a question I'm looking at here. Do the questions reflect if we live in Modesto? How about if we work in Modesto? How do we represent this? Yeah, and I've been saying that for the last couple of questions. That's been one of the options. So if you work in Modesto, please answer the surveys as best you can. For example, this one, if you live in one of these areas or you work in one of these areas, just pick that area. So great, we got answers. 20% are in area 1 in the northwest corner. 53% are in area 2, really in the southern portion of the city. And then a pretty even distribution, a little bit higher in area 5, again, in the northern portion, and the rest of the areas are relatively even. So great, thank you very much. That's really helpful. And now we'll get back into giving you some more information. I hope you find that interesting. And again, these answers will be in the recorded presentation and just helps us understand who's in the room, particularly when we get to the Q&A later on. And again, at any time during this, you can submit more comments and questions. We'll try to keep track of those and answer as many as we can along the way and at the end of this presentation. So right now, I would like to hand it off to my colleague, Hannah Kreitman, who's going to present the next several slides, more than several, talk about community engagement and a background on housing elements. And then I'll join you for the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Dan. This will be a quick overview of what kinds of community engagement we've conducted and will continue to conduct for the update of the city's housing element. Community engagement helps the city understand what issues need to be addressed in their general plan update. To ensure robust engagement, all materials and presentations are provided in both English and Spanish. Information and community engagement plan activities include a city webpage and informational flyers, meetings with focused community groups, stakeholder interviews. We've held 4 stakeholder focus groups on May 23rd, 24th, and 31st, as well as June 8th. We've reached out to over 35 individuals and organizations, of which 13 participated. The 13 participants represented 10 different agencies and community-based organizations, such as educational, community outreach, fair housing, property managers, environmental, and affordable housing developers. The online community survey is now open and will remain open through October. We have 2 community workshop presentations scheduled. The first was last week on July 6th, and the second is tonight. The draft housing element update was published June 16th and will remain open for comment through July 17th per the 30-day minimum set by state law. We will have 2 public hearings at the Planning Commission and City Council prior to adoption scheduled for the end of 2023. Information about the housing element update is on the city's website, along with links to the online community survey in both English and Spanish, which will be included in a QR code on the following slide. The website also includes a link to subscribe to further updates on the housing element, as well as a link to contact the city with any comments or questions you may have. We need your input. As previously stated, the survey will remain open through October of this year. We have had 75 respondents so far, 74 in English and 1 in Spanish. Comments received thus far noted that low-income households, persons experiencing homelessness, and seniors are the groups most in need of housing. Programs and policies should prioritize incentivizing selling or renting to locals and supporting and incentivizing ADUs. South Modesto was the area identified as the most in need of resources and amenities. The survey is anonymous and it takes less than 10 minutes. Your input is very important and helpful in developing the housing element to understand and identify the housing and related needs of the community and priority actions and programs. Please go to the website as shown on the previous page or capture the QR code shown here to participate in the online survey. Please share these opportunities with your family and friends to help us reach and hear from as many people as possible. We'll show all these QR codes again at the end of the presentation. This is the housing element update process. We are currently in the draft housing element update and program stage, which is the second box. The draft housing element update will be submitted to HCD for its 90-day review at the end of July. Public review will continue throughout the entire process through the end of 2023. I'm now going to give some background on the housing element update and what it means for the city of Modesto. The housing element ensures that the general plan provides enough opportunity for housing development for people of all income levels, identities, and life stages, including special needs populations such as homeless individuals, seniors, veterans, and people with disabilities. It ensures that housing development is not being precluded due to lack of land zoned for housing, and that enough land is zoned and suitable to accommodate both large and small multifamily developments such as single-family homes. This is also referred to as housing capacity. As part of the update, the city is required to evaluate what land is available for development to ensure it has the capacity to produce housing for households of all incomes through the 2023 to 2031 housing element cycle. The city must ensure it has the capacity for the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, also referred to as RHNA, which I will describe on the next slide. Every 8 years, the California Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, issues a quantity of housing units by income level reflective of the housing need of a region to each Council of Governments, or COG. The COG then allocates a portion of this Regional Housing Need Allocation, or RHNA, to each jurisdiction in the COG region. In the case of the City of Modesto, this allocation was made by the Stanislaus Council of Governments, or STANCOG. The RHNA is broken down into 5 income categories to evaluate housing need based on the Area Median Income, or AMI, for each metropolitan statistical area. Each jurisdiction must then draft a housing element to demonstrate the capacity for the allocated RHNA, or the city's share of the regional housing needs. Modesto's total RHNA is 11,248 lower, moderate, and above moderate income units. The housing element consists of 6 main chapters. The first is the review of past accomplishments, which reviews the 2015 to 2023 housing element and evaluates progress on housing goals, objectives, and policies, as well as determines the effectiveness of these policies and describes how these policies will be incorporated in the 2023 to 2031 housing element. The element also reviews progress towards meeting the 2015 to 2023 RHNA and effectiveness at serving special needs populations. The needs assessment evaluates characteristics that inform housing need, including population trends, demographics, employment trends, household characteristics, housing stock characteristics, housing inventory, and market conditions, as well as preservation of at-risk units. The assessment also analyzes the housing needs of various special needs groups, including elderly persons, large households, female-headed households, persons with disabilities, including developmental disabilities, homeless persons, farm workers, and extremely low-income households. The AFFH, or Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing chapter, analyzes barriers that restrict access to opportunities and identifies goals to address the impacts of systemic issues such as residential segregation, housing cost burden, and unequal educational or employment opportunities to the extent these issues create and or perpetrate discrimination against protected segments of the population. The constraint section identifies and evaluates factors that may pose significant constraints or burdens that limit or constrain the production of housing to meet our local and regional housing needs and the goals and objectives of the general plan. The Sites and Resources section of the housing element provides an overview of available land resources and residential sites for future housing development. It also evaluates how these resources can satisfy future housing needs, as well as reviews financial and administrative resources available to support affordable housing. It also discusses resources available for the development, rehabilitation, and preservation of housing in Modesto. The chapter identifies specific sites with capacity to meet the RHNA, but the inclusion of a site does not require the jurisdiction or landowner to build or finance housing on the site. Suitable sites are selected only to demonstrate the capacity for housing. The goals, policies, and programs in the housing element include programs that the city will implement over the next 8 years. Each program has an action, a timeline to complete the action, a funding source, an implementing agency, and, where applicable, a quantified objective or geographic target for the program. The City of Modesto's Community Development Division, or CDD, is largely the implementing agency for housing element programs. Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, or AFFH, is a new requirement for housing elements that was added by Assembly Bill 686 in 2018. AFFH includes taking meaningful actions in addition to combating discrimination that overcome patterns of segregation and foster inclusive communities. The housing element will have an entire section dedicated to furthering fair housing. The AFFH chapter must analyze how the town assists in implementing civil rights laws that prohibit housing discrimination, conditions indicating segregation in the city, any racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty and affluence, any disparities in access to opportunity, including access to high-quality employment, education, and healthcare, any groups that face disproportionate housing needs or are subject to displacement risks, and finally, the city must identify meaningful goals, policies, and actions to further fair housing. These actions must include specific metrics, timelines, and other evaluation criteria to help track progress. The compliance of the City of Modesto's housing element is due on December 31st, 2023. If the housing element is not found in compliance by December 31st, the city will be subject to builder's remedy until the housing element is found in compliance. This means proposed affordable housing projects where 20% of units are lower income, or 100% of units are moderate income, or emergency shelters, would not be subject to the city's zoning code or general plan land use designations. The city may be required to approve these affordable projects unless the project has a specific adverse effect on public health or safety, is in violation of state or federal law, is proposed on land zoned for agriculture or resource preservation, or does not have adequate water or sewage facilities to serve the project. If Modesto's housing element is not found in compliance by HCD by the end of the 120-day grace period, which ends on April 29th, 2024, the city may be vulnerable to litigation, loss of local permitting authority, and loss of state or federal funding, which may include disqualification of eligibility for state grants, such as SB 1, SB 2, local early planning grants, and Prop 1, a carryover of current RENA units to the next cycle, fines and penalties, risk of lawsuit, or a court receivership or special agent appointed to oversee the housing element until it is consistent with state law. I'm going to hand it back to Dan to summarize the RENA strategy and programs for the City of Modesto. Dan, I'm not sure if we can hear you.
Sorry, I put myself on mute so I wouldn't cough. Thank you. Thanks, Hannah. That was a lot of good explanation there. And now that hopefully you get a sense of the content and the purpose and a lot of the specifics of the housing element, I want to talk about meeting the RENA. So that's really these two main components of the housing element. Once we do all the other analysis, is coming up with demonstrating adequate sites to meet that very specific number of 11,248 units in the next 8 years. And that's meeting the RENA. And then after that, we'll talk about the various programs that we anticipate or have drafted already. So first of all, I just want to get into the RENA. Again, as Hannah mentioned, this comes from the state. So every 8 years, the state evaluates the overall needs to meet our housing needs statewide. And in this term, they came up with a number of over 1.4 million new units to be provided over the next 8 years. That's an 80% increase over the prior housing element cycle from 2015 to 2023 and just ending this December. So we need to come up with 80% more homes statewide. That gets distributed amongst each of the regions. In this case, Stanislaus County is our region. And Stanislaus County got its fair share, which is based on kind of demand, jobs, growth and growth opportunity. And there's kind of an algorithm that they use to divide this out. But Stanislaus County got 34,000 of the 1.42 million, so actually a relatively small piece. Of that, Modesto got 11,248 of those units. That's a 76% increase over the last period, so that's consistent with what's happening statewide, although a little bit lower than the overall state increase. So you kind of see that fair share proportion. This next slide compares the current fifth cycle housing element from 2015 to 2023, ending in December 31st, with our new assignment, our sixth cycle, sixth 8-year period. And that will begin beginning really January 1st and go through December 31st, 2031. So in the top row, you see our current allocation. On the right-hand column is the total. The intermediate columns are the individual portions by income level between very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. You get your total, and the current housing element needed to demonstrate that we could provide, city could provide 6,747 units. The new allocation is now totaling 11,248, and you can see the relative breakdown. And in the final row, you can see the changes by income level and total. So, roughly 67% increase overall, and you can see the individual increases there. So that's just to kind of show you what's happening statewide and what's happening here in Modesto. Then, talk a little bit more about those individual income levels. So they range from extremely low to very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. And you can see these represented here for Modesto and Stanislaus County. Those ranges are all based roughly on percentages of the area median income or household income, and you can see that on the bottom row there. So it's about 74,000 for Modesto, and if we were to apply the target, what's considered a comfortable percentage of your income to spend on housing, that's generally about 30%. Most people spend more, frankly, because housing is so expensive and so important. So a household of $74,000 income would be able to afford about comfortably afford about $1,850 a month in rent, or the purchase price of about $250,000 home. So that's just, you can kind of see how these break down. And then, so this also gives you the targets. When we're looking for affordable housing, you can go, okay, we've got a lot of people and we've got these RHNA assignments for each of those income levels. So we're trying to find housing that will be affordable at those rents or those purchase prices for each of those income levels. So again, in terms of the RHNA allocations, a few points we want to make. The city must always maintain sufficient land and site capacity to meet the RHNA over the full 8-year period between 2023 and 2031. It's important to note that the city is not obligated to actually build housing. Whether and to what extent housing is developed is up to the property owner. So again, the city doesn't build it. We just need to make sure that it's possible and likely without too many constraints, so that the private market, the property owners and developers can hopefully see the market and meet that market demand. The city identifies eligible and suitable sites, which really is getting into the zoning, the size, the land use, the features of the property, whether there's any constraints, and projects the number of units that each property that we identify is possible or likely to generate over the next 8 years. So we apply a number of assumptions for each and every property based on its characteristics. And we need to, again, demonstrate that we can meet that RHNA. If a site is developed at a density or number of units lower than what we projected, or even for different incomes, if they're for higher incomes than we projected, the city must make up that lost capacity within 6 months. That's considered a net loss. So we keep track of that 12,500 plus RHNA that we've projected on a whole bunch of properties, and I'll show you that in a minute. And as those properties get developed over the next 8 years, we keep track of that, and hopefully we meet the targets or exceed those targets. If we fall below, we need to make those up within 6 months of losing any capacity. So that's a trick. And for that reason, it's recommended that we don't have it exactly 12,248. We provide ourselves a little buffer, additional site capacity. And in this case, we're projecting about a 15% buffer so that if we lose a site or two, we don't immediately have to find a replacement site. We have more flexibility and time over the next 8 years. And this avoids having to amend the housing element or add new sites or to rezone sites to meet that capacity. And listing or mapping a property as a RHNA site does not require the city or the property owner to develop the property. That's an important point. I'll say it again. Just by being on the map or listed in this housing element does not change or obligate the property owner to develop a site. It merely says that this is possible and this is how we meet the state's requirements to show that we have adequate capacity. That's really what this is all about. Okay, site inventory requirements. When we identify sites, we have a number of things that we look at. So overall, we're identifying that capacity, that RHNA. We need 12,248, and we need those in each of those income levels based on that breakdown that was shown in the slides earlier. In addition to that, we've got a number of parameters that we have to consider and demonstrate in the housing element, and that includes the size of the properties. Particularly for the lower income sites or higher density sites, they need by state law to be between a ½ acre and 10 acres in size. It's just kind of an optimal size, particularly if you're going to develop affordable housing. We can go beyond those, but then we have extra hurdles to jump through. So that's one of the parameters we're looking at when we identify sites. Then we look for infrastructure. It's got to have water, sewer, dry utilities, make sure it's capable of supporting this growth over the next 8 years. We look at the land ability to be developed. So not only infrastructure and utilities, but are there environmental constraints on there? Are there easements or other limitations on a property? And so we try to filter those out or factor those in so we don't over project our capacity on each site. And then we look at the near-term opportunity, development opportunity. So again, we have to show this is likely to happen within the next 8 years. If the property is vacant or really underutilized, mostly vacant, it's pretty easy to demonstrate that that's ready and capable of being developed in the next 8 years. If it's got an existing land use on it, it doesn't preclude that, but we need to look a little bit more closely at the uses on there, the conditions of the uses, maybe if there's vacancies, how old the buildings are, et cetera, to see if they're likely to be redeveloped or expanded over the next 8 years. And then we have this assignment that Hannah mentioned, the furthering fair housing, and the city must demonstrate that the sites further fair housing. So in that regard, we're looking to avoid concentration of housing and particularly in like lower income areas or areas that don't have a lot of resources. We want to make sure that particularly lower income housing is well distributed and has access to good employment and services and transportation. It's going to be a good, healthy, affordable place to live. Good schools and education are important as well. Okay, so real quick, I'll summarize our RHNA sites approach. Again, we look at the existing general plan and zoning. What's that allow? Then we look at recent and pending projects, because most cities have projects that are constantly going through the improvement and development cycles. And we're able to count those if they haven't been built as of June 2023. So anything that still hasn't been built, but may be pending or currently being applied for, we can count toward meeting our RHNA. Then we look at accessory dwelling units or ADUs. Modesto hasn't had a lot of those yet, but we're seeing a lot of cities with those increasing dramatically, and we're able to project those based on, on past trends. We can project those forward and also subtract those from our RHNA. And then we need to identify vacant and underutilized sites to make up that difference. We look at the commercial corridors in the downtown. Those are great spots because they are designed and planned for higher density and more intensive uses. They've got transportation and jobs and services, and generally can accommodate more residential more easily than maybe other areas. And we're also looking for, again, those access to transit services, employment, and then again, the concentration, making sure there's a good distribution throughout the city. So you can see here's a little map here, and on the next slide, I think we actually show this is kind of our map. And so, like we said, there is a draft housing element that's out, and this table kind of summarizes that RHNA, how we're meeting the RHNA. And so it goes through each of those steps I just kind of talked about. The RHNA is at the top. We subtract out rows B and C, the pending projects and projected ADUs. That gives us kind of our remaining or unmet RHNA. And then we add 15% to that. That's that buffer I talked about. That becomes our new target. That's really what we're planning for in this housing element. And then we look at our opportunity sites, which are the vacant and non-vacant sites, the underutilized sites. And we go through those criteria and filter out the best sites, the ones that are most likely to occur in the next 8 years. And we tally those up until we can meet our RHNA. And this table shows that we've done that. And at the bottom row, we've met our target buffer of a 15% buffer. So you can see we're at 16, 16, 19, and 15 for each of those income categories. And what that looks like is on this next slide. So here's our map of the city of Modesto. You can see the boundaries outlined in the black outline, and it gets all kind of fragmented around the southern portion where there's islands, county, unincorporated portions of county islands kind of in and around the city boundaries there. And in the colors, those are the sites that we've identified that will meet that RHNA. Those are based on that table on the prior sheet or prior slide. These are the sites that we've identified. So you can see that that hot pink are the higher density sites, the more dwelling units per acre. That'd be primarily like apartment buildings. Could be mixed use buildings, mixed use commercial and residential. And you see those kind of two pink zones in the Sisk Road corridor and the McHenry Avenue corridor. That's the diagonal on the west side, and then the vertical right down the middle of the city. And there's a few other sites. There's a couple in kind of the central, east central, and that's a current mixed use area designated by the general plan as mixed use. There's some proposed rezonings for each of these areas to allow higher density residential in there, and in those areas, that's a mixed use area 8 and mixed use area 11. Those are going to allow multifamily development, otherwise consistent with the R3 zone in the city. So just kind of shows that. And then there's other areas in like that. The green is our moderate income. The income levels are really tied to the density. That's the way the state does it. So when you reach certain density, then you can apply those sites toward meeting your lower income if you meet a density of 30 dwelling units per acre or greater. And then anything below that falls into the moderate. And if they're low density sites like single family homes, those generally qualify to meet our requirements for the above moderate RHNA. And you can see those in that purple color. And you see those up around the northern perimeter of the city. And there's one down in the southwest corner as well. And then you can see also, I talked about those pending projects. There is a crosshatch pattern. It's a little hard to see on this, but if you see where there's a crosshatch on those colored areas, those are pending projects. Those are ones that have been recently approved or are currently going through the approval process. So overall, again, we're looking for a good distribution throughout the city. We have that. And again, we've got good representation along those areas that have access to transit and jobs and services, where it'll be efficient and a good place to live. Okay.
Dan,
yes.
We've received several comments and questions from the Spanish room. I think now would be a good time to pause and turn to Giovanna for some translation.
Perfect. Great. Let's do that. Thank you. I see we've got, it looks like 3 of them. So go ahead, Giovanna. Giovanna, we can't hear you. You need to come into the English side, I believe.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, so first question from Bianca Lopez. It says, why aren't the reports and agendas translated? How can we be updated if the necessary information is not being produced? That's number one. Then the second one says, these analysis, have they been fulfilled? And are they going to be accessible to the members of the community? Do you think you will share these studies? And then the last one says, but could you continue to answer in English, but the question and answer is not being translated in English. This is what we're expecting when the city is talking about equity. And those are the three questions.
I think we were having some technical difficulties. If you can hear me and not Giovanna, click the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen and select either English or Spanish. If you are currently checked off on original audio, you won't be able to hear the translation.
Good. Thank you, Hannah.
Giovanna, if possible, I think we had a few people that were stuck between the rooms. So if maybe once people jump into the English room, you could repeat the translation of each question.
Of course, yes. I will give them like a few more seconds. Okay. The first question was, why aren't the reports and agendas being translated? How can we be updated if the right information is not being produced? Second comment is, have these analyses been fulfilled? Are they going to be accessible to the community, to the members of the community? How do you think you will share these studies? And the last comment in Spanish is, but if you continue answering in English and the question is not translated or the answer into English, this is what we expect when the city talks about equity.
Hi, everyone. So I think Dan's having some issues joining the English room, but I just wanted to speak to actually the translation. And so this is our initial draft where we're doing our outreach both in English and Spanish. And then once we receive responses from HCD, we plan on translating the entire document before it moves forward for a public hearing to both our Planning Commission and Council, to both Spanish and English. We also anticipate additional community outreaches during that time. Giovanna, are there any other questions or anything else I missed?
I don't see any other questions.
So yeah.
Great.
Translation and the Q&A responses are be provided in Spanish live.
So the second question that was asked about how the studies are being shared, we are sharing these through this draft plan, and then these analysis and the data will continue to be accessible in the final plan as well, which, as Ms. Hill said, we will continue to do outreach through the final plan even once we have gotten HCD comments.
And if there's any other additional questions, please feel free to add them to the question and answer portion.
I'm sorry, I think I see one more comment in Spanish. Do you want me to translate it?
That would be great. Thank you.
Yes, it says, I can't hear anything in Spanish. Why didn't you select the webinar type where the participants can not communicate and see who else is on the workshop?
So Giovanna, if you can make sure you translate my answers into Spanish, that would be great. And then if we need to pause and go through actually kind of how we can listen to it in Spanish, that may be great for our participants as well, if we need to do that again.
Dan, maybe we could go back to the first couple slides and review.
Entonces, de repente podemos...
Great. I will do that momentarily. Here we go. You guys can see the slide?
Yes, Giovanna, would you mind providing instruction on how to listen to the presentation in Spanish for anyone that may have missed the beginning?
Yes, I can do that. However, I would need to be brought back to the main audio because otherwise they will not be able to hear me.
I can do that.
Okay. So the key is to go into your Zoom toolbar, hit the More button. And that drops down. There should be a line that says Interpretation, and then click on that and pick English or Spanish. And then we can hear. And I apologize, I didn't have mine on, so that's why I couldn't hear you before.
Muy bien, entonces solamente como un recordatorio rápidamente, si usted no es bilingüe, tendrá que elegir su idioma para escuchar la interpretación. Y para esto tiene que entrar simplemente al globo terráqueo que dice interpretación, seleccione español y luego haga, si está usando un teléfono o un iPad, entonces va a ubicar el menú de 3 puntos que aparece arriba a la derecha, selecciona nuevamente interpretación de idiomas, elija español y luego va a seleccionar así el idioma que en el cual necesite escuchar. Gracias. Thank you. I may.
Okay. Thank you, Giovanna. Okay, so hopefully everybody can hear everything and we're in. I think we answered the 3 questions about providing translation services going forward. And again, if there's any questions about that, we can follow up. And you can always contact the city to ask any questions directly. We will have a slide at the end that will get you to the website where you can sign up on more information. You can also, there's a link there so you can submit comments and questions, and there'll be a phone number where you can contact the city to get additional assistance. So we want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to participate in this. Okay, at this point, I'm going to jump back to the last few slides, and then we'll get into just finish off with these housing programs, and then the Q&A, next steps and Q&A. So
and at the end, we can review all Q&A questions and answers that have come through so that Giovanna can translate the answers into Spanish as well.
Exactly. Very good. That's right. Okay. So housing programs and policies. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, there's kind of 2 main pieces to the housing plan. There's 6 chapters, but they really fall down to the most critical components, and that's the sites, the arena that we just went through, and then the policies and programs and actions. And that's what I'm going to cover right now. So housing programs. We have 41 different proposed programs in the draft housing element that's out for public review. Those could be modified. Often the city or the state will push us to add a few more programs or to adjust our programs after the public review. So right now we've got 41. Some of those are carried over from the current or prior housing element, and they're maybe being modified and updated for the next 8 years. And then there's some new ones as well. All of these are organized around 6 main housing goals that are shown on this slide. And those refer to housing production, that's meeting the RHNA, constraint removal, again, allowing housing production without undue burdens, housing conservation and preservation. So once we have the housing, we want to keep it and want that housing supply to grow along with the population of the city. So we've got a balance between our demands and our needs. Then there's a whole chapter or section on special housing needs. As Hannah summarized earlier before, that's to provide housing for all portions of the population based on income, based on any special status. But examples are seniors, veterans, small families, large families, persons with disability, homeless. So we look at all of these things and try to make sure that their needs are being met. There's a whole chapter on that and a whole set of goals and actions. And then affirmatively furthering fair housing. What are we specifically doing to make sure that people have good access and an opportunity for housing throughout the city, again, for all these different needs. And then finally, we have a section on community outreach and engagement that has making sure people are aware of their rights, their responsibilities, and opportunities. And so there's a lot of community engagement that will go on throughout this process. So much like we're doing tonight, there's other opportunities to provide information and make sure that people are aware and understand, how to access housing. So with these, I can give some examples. I've got a couple on the next slide. But let me summarize a few quick ones real quick. So for housing production, I alluded to it in our RHNA discussion. We have a rezoning program. Generally, that's allowing multifamily housing in our mixed-use corridors along Sisk and McHenry and a few other mixed-use areas. City has a 5-year consolidated plan. That's a plan to determine how community development block grant funds that come down through the federal government are spent on housing. The city's looking at establishing a housing trust fund that would be funds used to leverage other funds and opportunities to, again, provide more housing and even density bonuses. The state has a minimum density bonus program, and there may be opportunities to go beyond the state minimum. Other programs in terms of constraint removal, what we're looking at is having objective design standards, things that are very clear and not subject to discretion or interpretation. So it's easy for applicants to understand what they need to do to meet the requirements to build housing. There's a provision for reasonable accommodations procedure. So if somebody has maybe perhaps a disability and needs something that doesn't fit with the current building code, there's a procedure there to accommodate them. So sometimes they're just exceptions to the rule, and we always have to have a procedure for that. There's a homeowner repair assistance program that exists and is proposed to continue to help conserve and preserve existing housing stock. In terms of special housing needs, there's $20 million of affordable housing funds available to assist. And a lot of that will go to homelessness fundings and programs. And there's a variety of things that the city has and is continuing to do to meet the housing needs, particularly for homeless individuals or people experiencing homelessness. And then affirmatively furthering fair housing, we have place-based improvements, particularly in the county island areas in that southern and southwestern portion of the city. There's a lot of disparities in there in terms of the availability to or accessibility to infrastructure and improvements, and trying to even those out over time. So those areas are getting the same facilities and opportunities as other portions of the city. And then community outreach, as I mentioned, there's a variety of programs to continue the discussion and education and understanding, including bilingual materials and outreach and engagement. So with that, just a couple of housing programs, and then we'll talk, then we've got a couple of questions for you after this slide. So get your cursors ready. We're going to ask a couple of questions in a minute. So again, just another couple of housing programs here is the density bonus ordinance. I alluded to that the state has a minimum requirement, and it's all kind of a sliding, complicated scale based on the number and percentage and the income level of affordable housing that's provided in any project. You can earn additional market rate or total units. So let's say you have a project with 100 units. If you made 20% of those available to lower income households, you could get a bonus of 35%, for example. The numbers might not be exactly right, but the more you provide, the more bonus you get. And there may be an opportunity to use that mechanism to go beyond the minimums required by state law to target and meet some of the needs, specific needs in Modesto. So other incentives that are considered are ways to incentivize and facilitate the production of those accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. These are typically like the garage apartment, small, they call them granny flats or in-law apartments, small units that are usually in the backyard, side yard, above the garage, for example. They can be attached or within the primary dwelling as well. And it's just, making good use of our existing lands and opportunities. Often that provides a source of income for the property owner. Many times the property owner will live, maybe it's an empty nester, they have a big single family house. They can live in the accessory dwelling unit while maybe a young family takes the other set of bedrooms. So there's incentives to facilitate accessory dwelling units. Those can be anything from fee reductions or waivers to streamline approval process. Sometimes many communities have done pre-approved accessory dwelling unit designs, and that will save time and money for anybody who wants to build one. Then we've got some other targets for incentives, and that would be missing middle. These tend to be the small multifamily projects like duplexes, where there's two homes in otherwise what looks like a single family home. They can be duplex, triplex, quadplex. And a lot of times those are kind of overlooked in the financing strategies. So we look for incentives and ways to again, facilitate those, if not provide an incentive for those. And then finally, we're always looking for ways to streamline the approval process, particularly for anything that's going to generate affordable housing. So those are just some of the programs that are in those 41 that I kind of highlighted on the prior slide. So with that, I'd like to ask you two final questions. And these are kind of the two primary questions that we ask in the online survey. We ask many other questions, but the two big issues that we struggle with the housing element, which is what are the three top housing issues facing Modesto? What do we need most? What's missing or what's problematic? And here's a number of different types here. And again, if at any time you don't see the answer here, you can use the other and use the Q&A button and type in the answer that you like there. So also, I'll just note that if you're trying to read the answers on your screen, if you hover your cursor over, if you can't see the whole answer, hover your cursor over it and it should pop up. Often that happens on the Spanish translation. The screen's kind of automatically sized. You can widen it on your screen, but if you put your cursor over it, it should give you the full answer. So I'll give you a few more seconds here to look at this. We're looking for the top three. So in no particular order: insufficient housing supply, we don't have enough, difficulty paying rent or mortgage or down payments, financing it, lack of the type of housing that's needed. We mentioned you might need seniors, you might need units that are small or large or designed for accommodate disabilities. Is the quality good? Do we have a problem with housing falling out of good repair? Is there any evidence or concerns about segregation or discrimination? That's something that falls into that fair housing practice. We really want to know about that. Many people have commented we need housing near transit to reduce commute times and just be an efficient place to live. Sometimes overcrowding is an issue. And again, homelessness. Every community is dealing with homelessness to one extent or another. And I know that's not anything new to Modesto. So those are the options. And if you have something else, please specify. These are really the big answers that we're looking for here. So we've got answers. This is great. Thank you very much. I'm going to expand this on my screen. So 82% insufficient housing supply, 91% difficulty paying rent and mortgage. That's that gap between what we can afford and what the market is. And typically for a median income household, the market's at twice what is comfortably affordable. The third highest answer was lack of suitable or needed housing types. So that's what I was just talking about, whether it's based on the size or special features or services even, that'd be great. And if you guys can take the opportunity, you can add this into the Q&A. And if there's any particular housing that you think is needed, please type that in. That's helpful, very helpful. So great, thank you very much. We've got one more question for you, and that's the big question. What can the city do? What are the top 3 programs or actions the city could do to address these issues? And so again, typical answers here, price controls on existing affordable units where they might exist. We try to keep those affordable as long as possible. Incentives to developers to provide more affordable units. That's the second bullet there. Require affordable housing units in new developments. Some cities do that. We call that inclusionary housing. So larger projects are required to provide a minimum percentage at certain income levels that would be affordable. The fourth one here is allow more higher density multifamily housing. Generally, multifamily housing is more affordable because you get more units per acre, and that reduces the land costs. There's other efficiencies in terms of construction, and so generally multifamily units are much more affordable and a better way to meet the numbers that we need. Simplify the approval process. We talked about streamlining opportunities and efforts, and then provide access to low-cost pre-designed plans for accessory dwelling units. I just mentioned that. That's something that many municipalities are doing to try to facilitate production of accessory dwelling units. Those accessory dwelling units are a really kind of low impact way to meet the housing demand, particularly for small households. They're affordable, and they also provide income for the property owner. So there's kind of a win-win situation there in many cases. And again, if there's anything else, please share your thoughts and comments. These are really important. These are kind of the 2 essential questions that we're trying to answer and struggle with in these housing elements. Okay, I've probably chatted long enough. We probably have time for some answers. Great. Number 1 response, provide incentives to developers that restrict a portion of the units to be affordable. Great, that's really useful to know. Then we've got like a 4-way tie for second, and that's extend price controls, extending the period on affordable units. So keep them, once they're affordable, keep them affordable. Require affordable units in new developments. That's why I just mentioned the inclusionary housing, where tract housing developers, for example, would provide a certain percentage. And it's usually 5 to 15% would be affordable. Allow more higher density multifamily housing. Good, glad to see that. And then our kind of third place is provide access to low-cost pre-designed plans for accessory dwelling units. These are great. Really appreciate these. Are very useful. Gives us a good indication of what you as involved stakeholders and interested citizens and residents and folks who have an interest in the success of Modesto think we can do. That will help us prepare the plan. I will say that these are things that are in the programs. Generally, most of these are already in the draft housing element. And we encourage you, if you haven't had the opportunity to yet, to go online and you can review that. You can download a copy of it. You make your own notes. And if you do have any questions or comments, we encourage you to submit those to the city. I'm going to go to the next slide here and just talk about these next steps. So this is just kind of where we are in the process from now through our adoption deadline, which is at the end of this year. Again, this cycle, the current cycle ends December 31st, and the new cycle begins January 1st through December 31st. So we are working diligently to get this done this year, and appreciate your input. So as I mentioned before, last week we had our first community workshop. That was recorded. That will most likely, I don't think it's on the website yet, but this one is also being recorded and will be posted on the website. And so that's that kind of orange bar there, the second row, July 12th, that's tonight. As I mentioned, the public review draft has been out since June 16th. It will be on through next Monday, July 17th. You can continue to comment on it, but what we're going to do is take those comments as of July 17th. We've got 2 weeks to incorporate all the input from these two workshops, from the online survey, from any comments that are submitted on that draft plan that's been out since June. We've also had stakeholder interviews. We had focus groups. We had 4 of those. We're taking all that information, plus the city has been conducting community focus groups with various organizations. I believe it has a couple more planned, and we're taking all that input. We're going to take all that, make revisions, and then we submit it to the state. That's the Housing, Community, and Development Department, HCD. And then HCD will take that plan, take 90 days, and give us a letter back and say what changes they think need to be done. As I mentioned at the beginning, unlike the other chapters or elements of the general plan, the city's general plan, the housing element needs to be approved by HCD. And so they're reviewing it very closely with a whole long list of state requirements and guidelines, and making sure that we're meeting all those requirements. So we'll get a letter back at the end of October. So that the HCD review will be July 31st through the end of, October 29th. If we're lucky, they'll give us those comments back a little earlier. And then we will, again, take those comments, make revisions, put this back out for public review again. So you'll have an opportunity to review and comment again on the revisions, and we'll identify all the revisions that we make. We call it track changes. They'll be in red line and underlined. So they'll pop out and be very clear what's been changed. And then we'll take those comments and we'll take those revised plan for approval, first going through the Planning Commission. And we're tentatively scheduled for November 6th, 2023 of this year to go to the Planning Commission. And then following the Planning Commission, they make a recommendation to the City Council on whether to adopt it or not. And we are tentatively scheduled to go to City Council on December 5th for a public hearing and adoption. So that's our schedule. And again, you can comment at any time during this process, including those hearings. And again, you can use the online survey that will remain open pretty much until we get to those hearings in November and December. And you can comment on the draft housing element that's up for review now. And again, a revised draft will be up in November for your review. If we're lucky, we can get that out a little bit earlier toward the end of October. And then we'll be taking those comments again, making revisions, and taking that forward to the Planning Commission and City Council for approval. So with that, we now have lots of time. So here, I just want to show you, this is these QR codes and links will take you to the online survey. Again, that will be open through October of this year. So there's the QR code in English, there's a QR code for a version in Spanish. And if you want copies in paper, just contact the city. We can make paper copies available. Sometimes people are more comfortable that way. We'll get those out, collect those back, and pull those into our final tally of all the responses. And then that final bottom QR code there is to the project website, where again, you can get the surveys and other information, including a recording of this presentation. And you can also sign up for future announcements of other workshops or new information. And you can also submit comments that way as well. And I will note that you can contact Diana Lawrence in the planning department. This is her email, and this is her phone number. So if you have questions, you can contact the planning department directly as well. So with that, we now have time to answer your questions. And you know what, I will put it back on this page so that people have time to write down those links or use that QR code, and we can go into your questions. So it looks like we've got, I think we've answered the questions in Spanish. I don't know if we want to do those again because I was not able to hear them.
Something we might want to do, Dan, is go through the questions that have been answered already so that the people who are in the Spanish room can hear what the questions were and hear the translation of the answer as well. Okay.
So there was about 10 questions that we had. I'll run through them. One was just, can we see who was on the call? I answered that verbally, that, we're letting people remain anonymous, but we were up to 20 or 21 attendees, members of the public. There's 6 panelists here from the city and consultants. And then how do we answer these questions? So there's a question about, these questions of those pop-up questions. So I think we've gotten through those. There's a question here, is Stanislaus County responsible to prepare a housing element plan? Yes, every municipality in the state must prepare a housing element. It's required of every city and all counties. That's so the Stanislaus County will do one for the unincorporated portions of the county, which is anything that's not the city. Let's see, then there was a question. We had a question in Spanish, which I believe was about getting materials in Spanish. And I don't know if we have an answer that we can provide in Spanish to that one. I think, again, we're providing live translation. This live translation, as well as this English version of this recording, will be on the website. So anybody who wants to listen later in Spanish can listen to this again. Please share this with any friends, colleagues, anybody you think that might be interested. If you have any other questions, please contact the city directly about perhaps getting assistance for translation or interpretation services. And that may include whether we can produce any of these in Spanish. Let's see, how does the city maintain a balance between ensuring houses are built within the next 8 years? That's a good question. Again, the city needs to make it possible. And that's what we're showing and demonstrating as part of this housing element, that there's adequate zoning, sites that are suitable for development, and that they're zoned appropriately at various densities to meet the full range of housing needs. So that's our job. And then, as I mentioned in the program section, there's a variety of programs that the city can do. Again, the city's not responsible and not required to build housing. But the city has an interest in making sure that housing is provided because it's important to everybody to have good housing. And that's important for the general economy and quality of life for the city, that everybody's housing needs are met. So they provide various programs. And there's a lot of programs. Modesto is very conscientious, has a very comprehensive set of programs currently to address their housing needs. It's very impressive. And then again, we're expanding on this with these 41 programs. So I encourage you to look at those. It is a delicate balance. It is a challenge. And I have to say, of all the housing elements in the cities that we've worked on, we're very impressed with how involved and comprehensive Modesto is about meeting their housing needs. Another question is, other than avoiding concentrating housing in lower income areas with fewer services or resources, what other measures are used to affirmatively further fair housing? What strategies do cities employ to accomplish this, and what are HCD's expectations? That's a really good three-part question. So in general, again, we're looking for that distribution that avoids overconcentration. We're also looking to make sure that there's housing opportunities in areas with high opportunity. So not only avoiding concentration, but making sure there's access to portions of the city that are deemed high opportunity. And the state actually produces a series of maps that they break down into three parts, and then they do a composite map that talks about what areas are best. And then we want to see housing opportunities in those areas. And I will say that this distribution of sites does very well in terms of providing housing opportunities in, quote, high opportunity, end quote, areas. And as I mentioned, that's access to employment, educational resources, services, and transportation in general. It's also environment. We try to avoid, over concentration in areas that might have less good environmental outcomes because of air quality, for example. So there's a lot of different things in play there, but that's part of it. And where did the other part of the question go? Sorry, I was trying to get to the other portions of the question. What are cities doing? What are HCD's expectations? Again, HCD has very specific things. They will look for that distribution, number one. One of the other strategies is, and HCD will look for this as well, is called place-based improvements. So in areas that may not have the best access to opportunity, we want to see those areas improved so that they're comparable. They have comparable facilities and services as the high opportunities areas of the city. So that's where I mentioned, particularly in the south and southwestern portions of the city, where there's a lot of those county unincorporated areas. That's an area that's been targeted for various improvements. And the improvements can be all sorts of things. Can be improving streets, sidewalks, lighting, landscaping, can be facade improvement programs in the business district, anything that really contributes to the quality of life. Can be safe routes to school for kids, making sure that there's, again, good sidewalks and crosswalks and pathways, for example. Could be access to parks, things like that. So many of these are often capital improvement projects, and they get scheduled as part of the city's capital improvement plan, which are generally 5-year plans, and every year they get updated and extended. So HCD will be looking for those types of things in areas that might be underrepresented or not on par with other, areas of the city. Let's see. Okay, good questions on that one. Let's see. I see how challenging it is to attain 11,248 units. Yes. And especially how you say it's really out of the city's hands. Yeah, the city kind of think about throwing a party. You can invite everybody, you can set the table, you can bring menu and drinks and food. It's up to the private market and the property owners in this case to show up to the party and actually, enjoy the party. So the city can set the table, make it possible, provide some incentives, streamline it, et cetera, provide the zoning, but it's up to the private market to actually build the housing. There are some times where the city gets involved more directly, where there are some funds available that the city has access to, and they can also leverage funds and private development to help build housing. But again, the requirement is not that the city needs to build 11,000 units. There's really nobody that is capable of doing that. Let's see, we had a few questions in Spanish, which Maybe we want to read those out in English separately. It looks like there was 4 of those, maybe 5. I'll read the
There were a
last.
few of those that related specifically to getting translation services and getting
Mhm.
into the room.
Okay.
So getting into the correct room for that.
Good.
There was a question that was says low income people wait years to get into Section 8 programs and asks what the city is doing to help with the congestion. What kind of incentives can be started to make more houses for low income? And I can just respond with what Jessica said there in the chat. Over the past 6 months, the city's partnered to develop 96 new affordable housing units and has applied to the state for funding an additional 178 units. We work closely with the Housing Authority to advocate for more for our region. That's the answer there, basically.
Okay. Very good. Very good. Good. I assume that this is all being translated expeditiously by Giovanna. Thank you, Giovanna. Okay, the last question we had is the meeting was advertised as a community workshop. The meeting was facilitated in a webinar style. My suggestion for future community meetings is to include more interactive activities. The commenter understands that there may be anonymity involved. There are other ways to think about more interactive virtual community meeting. Yes, and I will say there's a challenge. We're trying to pack in a lot here. And that's why we do appreciate your participation and particularly writing in your comments in the Q&A section, but also taking advantage of all the other participation modes, which are, again, the online survey, this in the prior community workshop, direct comments on the housing element. Please review it. And if you've got comments and questions, please submit those primarily through an email. You can get to that on the city's website on this, as you see here on this bottom QR code. And again, I will say that the city has been doing direct community engagement. There's been several meetings with various community groups to, again, have that direct participation. So kind of shorter versions of this, a lot of the same material, but this kind of provides, the foundation for any of these discussions. And again, it is recorded and it is available. So I would encourage people to participate. And again, anytime, contact the city, go to the city's website. You can submit comments on email, and you can also submit comments in the online survey. That survey not only asks the questions, and most of them are multiple choice, but they also have many opportunities where you can submit direct comments. And we do look at those. And we incorporate those. So I think as of last night, we were up to about 80 respondents on the survey. We're looking for more. I know we've got more coming because there were some done in those community group meetings that were hosted directly by the city planning department. I know we had paper surveys, so we'll be getting those in. They're going to lag a little bit, but we're going to get those entered into all of the responses as well. And then those get reflected in our revised draft. That'll go into HCD, et cetera. And, but again, we'll keep track of that now through really until we get into those all through October. There's plenty of time. And then we'll be into the public hearings in November and December. So do we have any other questions or comments we want? It looks like we do have 2 open questions or comments. Good to know the city has ongoing tracking and monitoring as time progresses. Good. Answered that live. And I think
there was one that asked, go ahead, Hannah.
Oh, sorry, Michael. I was just going to say, I think the other question was a comment from Diana saying that we've met with Modesto Comité and West Modesto Collaborative and gathered surveys and input from those groups as well.
Yeah. Excellent.
And then the other question that was in Spanish is when we expect to translate the reports on the website, on the general plan website. And we are planning to have those translated in November prior to going to the committee and the council.
Right. Yeah. That's a big job, I'll just say, because this is a fairly long housing element. It's with appendices, typically about 300 pages. So it's not something that can be done very quickly, and it's a lot of technical items. So it's not something we're able to do for tonight, for example.
We do have other community groups we're reaching out to, and so we are speaking to the multi-faith leaders in the community. We have a presentation to our planning commission, and we're speaking to the airport neighborhood collaborative as well. So if there's other people who have community groups who you'd like us to come speak to about it, please put that in the chat or send Diana an email.
Great. Very good. Okay. Well, if there's any other questions, I don't see any. Keep getting muted. I'm not sure if I'm making noise or not, but
Dan, I don't think there's any other questions. I just want to kind of conclude and thank everyone for coming tonight. Again, if you have any questions regarding the housing element, please contact Diana Lawrence. We are excited to continue to promote our survey, so please also share that to your community groups as well. And then if you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to the city, and we look forward to working with you guys as we bring this forward to approval with the state of California. Thank you.
great.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.